I rode the Wayfarer's lamp for 11 years before I learned what kind of ship she really was. Not in the specs. Specs said long-haul patrol cutter, Terran border authority, crew of 6, unarmed beyond point defense. I knew the real answer the way you know a person's character only after you've watched them choose once, with nothing riding on the choice but who they were. I was riding along that run as a customs auditor. Nothing more 6 weeks confirming manifest seals on border stations nobody important ever visited. The kind of posting they give you when they want to keep you quiet and out of the way. The Wayfarer's lamp wasn't built for glory. She was built to run the same long loop of dead-end stations year after year. A hull with more patched seams than original plating, 6 bunks, and a galley that smelled permanently of recycled coffee. I'd grown almost fond of her by then, the way you grow fond of any room you've spent enough hours alone in. We were 3 days from home, crossing the Ailvern Shoal, when the Callian wing came up on the scope. I knew enough about the Callian sovereignty to know what that meant. Their armadas ran on something they called the doctrine of proportional advantage. Every encounter between Callian forces and an unknown party scored, logged, and resolved according to net tactical gain. It sounded cold because it was cold. It was also, in its way, merciful. A ship that resisted got destroyed. A ship that didn't got boarded, inventoried, and released, because seizing a defenseless hull cost more than it earned and the doctrine punished waste as readily as it punished weakness. 11 border stations had taught me the math. Hold still, lose your cargo manifest to their inspectors, get your ship back in 4 hours. Resist, lose the ship. I'd seen it run that way often enough that I'd stopped feeling my pulse climb when their wings showed up. It was paperwork with guns behind it, and I'd learned to treat it like paperwork. Captain Imogen Strand cut our drive and held position the second their wing marshal's hail came through. "We comply," she said, flat, to the comms panel, and then to the rest of us, quieter. "Nobody does anything interesting. Let them do their job." Their boarding shuttle launched off the lead cruiser, a blunt, armored thing they called a Severance pattern interdiction craft, and came across the gap between us at the unhurried pace of a process that had never once needed to hurry. I watched it on the forward display from the observation bay, 3 Callian crew visible through the canopy glass, doing nothing more dramatic than closing a distance they'd closed 1,000 times before. The debris field that killed that calm wasn't supposed to be there. A burned-out relay hulk, decades old, had shed a glancing shard of its own armor plate sometime in the last hour, slow, cold, invisible to anything but close-range tracking, and it crossed the shuttle's vector at a closing speed nobody had accounted for. I didn't see the impact so much as I saw the shuttle stop being a shape and become a problem. A long gash opened along its spine. Atmosphere went out in a silver cone that froze instantly into glittering dust. The shuttle's attitude thrusters fired once, ragged, and then went dark. Terran, working the defense console 2 seats down from me, said the words before he understood what he was saying. "Targets crippled. Defense grids flagging it, clean firing solution, 0 return risk." He looked up at the captain like he expected her to tell him to stand down from even thinking it. The grid wasn't wrong. A disabled interdiction shuttle, 3 crew, no weapons online, drifting dead in our own defensive envelope. By any doctrine I'd ever heard of, ours or theirs, that was a problem that solved itself if you simply let it. Captain Strand was already out of her chair. "Tran, kill the grid's firing authority. Now, helm, close on that shuttle, match its tumble." She was moving toward the airlock before Helm had even acknowledged. "Suit up whoever's free. We've got maybe 6 minutes before that hull finishes venting, and less than that before whoever's still breathing in their stops." Nobody argued with her, which afterward struck me as the strangest part of the whole afternoon. Not that she did it, but that none of us, not even Tran with his hand still hovering over a perfectly defensible firing solution, thought for 1 second to ask her why. I watched the rest of it from the bay window, because there was nothing useful I could do with my hands. Our cutter closed the gap on a wounded enemy boarding craft, We had every standing justification to let die, matched its violent tumble close enough to throw a magnetic tether across the gash in its hull, and held that lock while two of our crew in suits cut a working hatch out of warped plating with hand tools, because the shuttle's own airlock had buckled shut. I could hear them on the open channel, short sentences, no wasted breath, the particular calm people find when there's exactly one thing to do and they're doing it. It took 4 minutes longer than Captain Strand had given us, and every one of those minutes I watched our own hull stress readouts climb past lines I'd never seen them cross before, the tether straining against a tumble it was never rated to hold. Nobody on the bridge said a word about pulling back. We pulled 3 Callion crew out of that wreck alive. One of them barely, her suit ruptured at the shoulder seam, frost already forming across half her face by the time we got her into our own air. The whole Callion wing watched it happen. Their sensor feeds would have shown them everything. An unarmed Terran cutter with a clean kill sitting in its lap, choosing instead to spend its own structural integrity holding a magnetic lock on a dying enemy vessel, at the exact moment that vessel's own command structure had nothing left to offer in return. No treaty required it. No authority was checking. There was no later inspection that would have caught us if we'd simply done nothing, and logged the debris strike as bad luck for the other side. The wing marshal's voice came through our comms maybe 40 minutes after the rescue, once their own shuttle had docked and their survivors had been confirmed breathing. I don't know her exact rank in their structure. We translated it afterward as something close to marshal. But I remember the long pause before she spoke, the kind of pause that in a human voice would have meant someone choosing their next words very carefully. "Your seizure has been suspended," she said, "pending reclassification." Captain Strand didn't ask what that meant. She just said, understood, and waited. Your vessel inflicted 0 tactical cost upon itself in the standard sense and gained nothing recordable in return. The marshal went on, and there was something underneath the flat translation that I want to call disbelief. Though I can't prove that's the right word for whatever a Callian officer feels when her own doctrine fails to produce an answer. There is no entry in 3 centuries of contact protocol for a vessel that spends its advantage on an enemy with nothing left to offer. "We weren't calculating," Strand said. "We were just looking at 3 people who were about to die." Another pause longer than the first. Then, "That is the part we have no category for." The wing disengaged within the hour. No formal seizure was ever logged against the Wayfarer's lamp. What was logged instead, and I only learned this years later, from a Callian liaison attached to the first formal embassy, a woman who'd read the incident report so many times she'd memorized it, was a new line item in their threat assessment framework, one with no clean translation, that the embassy staff eventually rendered into our language as cost without account. I think about that phrase more than I think about almost anything else from those years, not because it was generous, though it was, because it was honest. The Callian had spent 3 centuries building a doctrine smart enough to survive contact with almost anything, and the thing it couldn't model wasn't our weapons or our numbers or our nerve under fire. It was a woman in a cockpit choosing, in under a second, to give away the only advantage she had to someone who could never pay it back, for no reason that would show up on any ledger anywhere. I never told this story for its drama. There wasn't much when you laid it out plainly. A debris strike, a tether, 4 minutes of hand tools against warped metal, a captain who didn't pause long enough to be talked out of it. But I was the one standing in that observation bay with nothing to do but watch. And in 11 years of riding cutters through quiet, forgettable corners of the border, I have never since seen anything that told me more clearly what we actually are than 6 people choosing, with no one keeping score, to be the kind of crew that pulls a dying enemy out of the dark. I think of the marshal's voice sometimes, that careful pause before she found the words, and I think she understood something that day that took her people 3 centuries of contact to even have a place to put. We never built a doctrine that could have told us to do what we did. We just did it, and let the doctrine catch up.